Very good afternoon to ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to post-lunch session 3. So we have a master speaker session now lined up. So the session would be chaired by Mr. Sanjay Singh. He's the group head from ITC. Sanjay sir, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Good afternoon to all the participants and to Nikhil for that. We are all know we have been reading a lot of articles on environment, and change which is happening in the world, and we are all experiencing it. Suddenly you get a lot of rains, you get dry weather, unpredictable weather, and all this is because of the increase in the temperatures which is happening, and through the basically carbon dioxide emissions. So a lot of countries have got together, the world has got together and have decided that need to be done something. And the target which has been set is maximum temperature rise of 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2050, not more than that. And a lot of countries have come forward to pledge that they will do a lot in this direction. But we don't think that we have reached that stage where we can be 100% sure that 1.5 degree will be achieved. So to understand this in a bit more detail, we have Nicole with us. She is the India Program Manager at the International Energy Agencies, the international organization responsible for providing authoritative analysis data, policy recommendation, and real-world solution to help countries provide secure and sustainable energy for all part of the energy focus on opening its doors to major emerging economies. Nicola is responsible for overseeing the agency's relationship and collaboration with India. Prior to joining the IEA in 2019, Nicola held a range of positions within the Australian government with a focus on energy, resources, environment policy, and significant experience in international engagement through postings to India and France. She holds a Master of Environment and Resource Economics from the Australian National University and Bachelor of Science from the University of Southern Queensland. So we look forward to a good presentation. It's a lot of learning, Nikhil, and over to you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Singh, and thank you for that very kind welcome. It's a great honor to be with everyone today, and hope that I can shed a bit more light on what the IEA is thinking is about net zero and our long-term energy future. So I'll just share my slides. Do let me know if everybody can see them. Hopefully they're coming up now.
Yeah, you can
perfect.
see it.
Great. So I just wanted to start out before I get into the net zero report. As Mr. Singh mentioned, I am the India Program Manager at the International Energy Agency, and I really just wanted to highlight the importance of India to the IEA and the importance of that relationship. So we've been engaging closely with India since the 1990s. The IEA, it's an international organization based on membership around OECD economies, but we've been really happy to increase that relationship with India. They joined as an association partner in 2017, and then just this year we've moved towards a new relationship called a strategic partnership, and we're really looking forward to a more collaborative relationship with the government of India as well as with key partners such as Greenco and CII. So it's really great to be here as a part of that broader relationship. But the topic I'm going to talk about more today is on our net zero roadmap. So the IEA developed earlier this year a roadmap to achieve a global net zero energy sector by 2050. So we're using this report to help governments and inform governments and other stakeholders in the energy sector to make decisions on supporting their own energy transitions. So just a few quick highlights before I get into some of the detail. Our analysis have found that the path to net zero globally, it is narrow, but it's definitely achievable in the energy sector. So we wanted to stress as well that it's a modelling exercise. It's something that we've been really proud to share, but just to highlight that this is not the pathway that the world is going to take towards net zero. There are a lot of different paths. There are a lot of different modelling outcomes and views about how this could happen and which levers are needed to get there. But so this is only one of many possible pathways. But also, and related to that, the different countries will also be coming from different points and doing that over different timings. So the specific pathway for every country will differ significantly and will depend a lot on that country's individual circumstances. So I guess the key sort of findings we've found from this net zero roadmap is that firstly, the world needs to make the most out of the existing clean energy technologies that we have. Secondly, we need to encourage innovation to bring forward new technologies, including advanced biofuels, hydrogen, and direct air capture. So bring forward these new technologies that aren't commercialized, aren't even maybe at like prototype stage yet. And also we need to do what we can to reduce the use of fossil fuels. This is something which is contributing a lot to emissions and that we need to work towards. One thing we found through this report is that the actions that the world can take to move towards net zero would lead to a historical surge in investment. So this would can also be incredibly valuable for the economy. There's no need for a transition to net zero to have a net cost. This can actually support GDP and support jobs in the economy. And then I'll also touch on later one other issue I wanted to cover is the implications for energy security. So the IEA was initially founded as an energy security organization, a lot around oil security. Our remit has got broader over time as the energy sector has changed. But considering the transition to net zero, we need to look at what that means for global energy security and how those risks will change. So moving into, if I can, oh, there we go, making sure I can change the slides. Moving into a bit more detail. So firstly, just to visually see what I mentioned about the different levers and the different paths that we could take. So compared to the IPCC net zero scenarios, the IEA will use a lot more renewables, energy efficiency and hydrogen, and less carbon capture, less negative emissions and bioenergy than those other similar scenarios. So that's not to say that these other technologies are less important. This is just the way that our model, the levers that we've used to get to that net zero point. So as I mentioned, one of the critical recommendations of this report is the importance of action soon. So we've called the 2020s the decade of massive clean energy expansion. So this is encouraging the rollout a lot of the existing technologies which are already available in the market and are already in most cases very, very competitive. So this includes a huge increase in wind and solar. So 2020 was already a record year in terms of the installation of wind and solar energy. We installed it's 260 gigawatts, but we need to quadruple this by 2030. And though this is a huge effort, a huge undertaking, we think that's possible. So even getting to that point in 2020 was a quadrupling over the point 10 years before that. And so this is while it's off a higher base, the industry has shown that it can expand to that scale previously. And then as electricity decarbonizes rapidly, we need to focus on encouraging increased electrification more broadly around the economy. So a key area where we want to work on this is in electric car sales. So currently around 6% of cars sold globally are electric vehicles, and we need to get that to around 60%. So multiplying by 18 times the percentage. So some countries are achieving this at a national level, but making sure we can scale that up and achieve it globally. And then the other critical area to focus on will be the acceleration of energy efficiency. And I think energy efficiency can often sort of be not as exciting as some of the fuels and technologies, but it's really critical in terms of making sure we use the energy that we do as efficiently as we can. So the magic number that we're targeting in terms of the reduction in energy intensity is around 4% per year. So this includes both ensuring that new infrastructure, new buildings are built in an energy efficient way, but then particularly for developed countries, it will also mean retrofitting of existing buildings to make sure that they are more energy efficient. And so, as I mentioned, one of the key outcomes of all of these big investments and these big actions to transition to clean energy is this historic surge in clean energy investment. So this would include investment across the full sort of value chain of electricity generation, infrastructure, end use, and also increasing use of low emissions fuels. So we, in our net zero scenario, annual clean energy investment more than triples by 2030, which is a huge amount. We actually prepared our net zero report jointly with the IMF. And one of the things that I think we're really encouraged about was the finding that a transition to net zero, like the positive impacts of it. And so the fact that it actually drives an increase in global GDP of around 0.4% per annum out to 2050. And so this, to 2030, sorry. So this increases the global economy, the equivalent of adding an entire new economy the size of Japan. And we think this is really timely, particularly to help economies continue to recover from the COVID-19 shock. This investment boost would be really, really productive. Some further good news is that the wave in clean energy investment also creates a huge growth in clean energy jobs. So energy supply currently employs around 40 million workers. And in this scenario, we would create an extra 15 million, which is really good to see. But as you'll note on the chart, there are also losses in terms of some of the jobs that we see currently in the fossil fuel sector. And that's something which I think we've been at the IEA really encouraging governments to think about, making sure the energy transition can be people-centered. And so focusing on how to support that transition in employment and making sure that those workers who lose jobs in these sectors, which are starting to transition, are supported with reskilling. And that's something that, looking at the levels of skill in the workforce of the future, a lot of these are higher skilled jobs coming into the clean energy side. So this is something that encouraging governments. So the clean energy transition, it's not just something for energy ministries to think about, it's also for the skills and employment and the labour ministries to consider how we can make sure that we reskill our industry, our workforce, to make sure that they're ready to take advantage of those new potential jobs in the sector. So moving on to looking beyond this huge rollout that we see of existing technologies to 2030, the other factor that we think really needs to be focused on is the boost that we need in innovation to move beyond these current technologies and get all of these other new technologies, which will be important for the energy sector, get them ready to be commercialized and rolled out at scale. So what we see by 2050 is that around 50% of the savings in CO2 will be done from those technologies in the market, and almost 50% will be done by new technologies which are currently being developed. And then that remaining 4% by changes in behaviour and linking to those energy efficiency savings. So there's a huge range of different technologies that we need to be focusing on. And I just sort of wanted to stress that much as we frame this as these new technologies will be responsible for the reductions in emissions beyond 2030, the important factor is that they need to be focused on now. You know, these technologies do take some time to develop, to put to market, to get them to a state where they can be commercialized at scale. And a lot of these technologies are in sort of the harder to abate sectors. So with electricity, a lot of the hard work has been done with renewables and the huge amount of renewables rollout that we're already seeing and that we still like to see accelerated over the next 10 years. But in terms of decarbonising some of those really hard to abate sectors, so looking at air transport, heavy freight, like maritime transport, the decarbonisation of some of the heavy industry sectors, so steel making, cement, a lot of those will require these new technologies that aren't quite ready on the market yet. So that's something that it's going to be important for governments and industry to look at how these can be accelerated and these technologies can be accelerated right now. So in our modelling, in our scenario, we see that it would take $90 billion of investment into demonstrations. And I guess one of the key things there also it'll be important to make sure that we're sharing information from this innovation globally. It's not going to help us get to net zero if these innovations are held specifically in certain countries, but it's something that we need to encourage, that collaboration between countries, and that's what we're hoping to at least contribute to partly at the here at the IEA. And so as I flagged in the introduction, I think it's going to be important to also make sure that stakeholders in the energy sector are aware of the changing energy security risks as well. So one of the key things that we see in our roadmap is a reduction in the use of fossil fuels, of oil and gas. Now, we don't see them going to zero. They're still going to be required in the long-term economy. But as we do that, we see that reduction in oil supply, we also see the oil supply becoming more concentrated in those suppliers who can provide electricity and provide oil supply at a low price. And so one of the outcomes of this modeling is that we see the share of OPEC's supply in the oil market reaching around 52% of that smaller amount by 2050. And that's the highest share of OPEC supply in the oil market since like ever. So that's something I think that the governments will need to be aware of that shrinking diversity in the oil markets. Another key energy security issue is the increased need for and reliance on critical minerals. So in terms of creating the increased solar PV panels, increased batteries, requiring a lot of these critical minerals such as copper, nickel, graphite, lithium, cobalt, a bunch of rare earths, and being able to ramp up that supply and ensure stable and secure supply of those critical minerals as part of the value chain will be really important. And at the moment, some of these minerals are heavily concentrated in certain geographical areas, which can create risks of supply and risks to the supply chain. So that's something which governments will need to think about, and companies as well who are reliant on those minerals, how to manage that energy security risk and that supply risk. And then the final sort of key energy security risk that we see emerging is the need for electricity system flexibility. So the increased amount of variable renewable energy in the system means your entire electricity system has to be able to respond to these changes in when it's sunny, when you've got more solar power, more wind, and making sure it's the system can flexibly respond and maintain security over time. So this is something we see particularly for India, that with such a huge rollout in renewable energy, that India is going to be one of the countries which sees the biggest increase in its electricity system flexibility needs. And so we had a little, like a mini sort of scenario in one of our previous World Energy Outlooks, which talked about the battery case and looking at if India can focus on increasing its own battery production and how much difference that could make to the electricity security as well as the affordability of batteries in India would be really valuable. However, it's important to note that batteries aren't the only flexibility solution. It's important that this is done as part of a broader flexibility portfolio in both the supply and demand side. So I guess bringing together this sort of global picture, and then I'll touch a few points on some of the India-specific work that we've done, is that the importance of setting near-term milestones to get on track for a long-term success. So this slide, it's probably, I don't know how well everybody's screen resolution is. There's a lot of different points. The Net Zero report had a huge number of milestones that are required for this particular scenario. And I think one of the most controversial ones which came out in the press was that we said there's no need for new fossil fuel investment in the short term if we've got this increase in clean energy investment. It is something I think that it's been a bit sensitive lately, as we've seen a bit of an increase in fossil fuel prices with like post-COVID, the increase in demand. But I think it's something that those increased prices are not due to the clean energy transition. It's other factors at play. And these specific milestones, they're something that we've set in place that this is one particular path, but just because if we don't meet these specific milestones doesn't mean we won't make it to net zero. It just means we'll be taking a slightly different path. But yeah, there's a lot of steps on the way in terms of aiming towards that longer term net zero future. So I just wanted to go a few quick points on India before we finish up and open up for questions, because we haven't done, in our net zero report, we haven't done any country-specific analysis saying this is how particular countries need to decarbonize in this path, because we do acknowledge that that's going to differ a lot between countries. But we had done some earlier this year, some analysis on India and its energy outlook under a range of different scenarios, looking at how India can recover from the COVID pandemic, what that means for what different scenarios meant for India's energy future. So that this included the standard scenarios that the IEA normally does in terms of the stated policies, and then a sustainable development scenario, so working out how the world can meet its sustainable development goals, but also some extra scenarios looking at, there was one, an India Vision case looking at some of the key policy commitments that India has, and a delayed recovery scenario, so looking at if the impacts of COVID lasted for longer than we had anticipated at the start of the year, which I think is probably fair to say with the second wave that we saw earlier this year, what that could mean for the energy sector and how that could progress. But one of the key things that we found out of the report, it was basically that India is at the center of the global energy system. It's really critical. The decisions that are made in India will be hugely influential for the energy sector as a whole. So we see that we see a lot of changes in terms of India's stated policy scenario and where these changes will go over this is out to 2040. So seeing an increase in modern renewables in the energy mix, an increase in oil becoming more driven not just by transport, but increasingly by petchem, coal, natural gas, nuclear, and a reduction over time in traditional biomass. But all of these, so except for traditional biomass, we're seeing huge increases in all of these fuels. In terms of energy security, again, one of the key energy security risks that we see in India is this increased import bill and the reliance on imports of oil. And that's something that if India can take a more sustainable path forward and reduce its oil demand, which we see as being possible in our sustainable development scenario, this can bring that import bill down by $1.4 trillion. And so this more than offsets the amount of investment into more renewables and more sustainable measures that would be spent there. So that's something I think is really encouraging to see as well. And one thing, I guess, that we found particularly is that the comparison between India and a lot of developed economies where energy demand is plateauing is very critical. And we see that, so the emissions coming from India, so from the power sector, a lot from the existing and under construction, we see plateauing, a little bit of emissions coming from new power, but not as much as we see this increased renewable energy and the phenomenal rollout of renewable energy that we've seen in India. But the likely drive in emissions in the future will be coming from those harder to abate sectors such as industry and transport, where there's a lot of this huge amount of new infrastructure coming. So a lot of the future emissions in India will be coming from factories, vehicles, and other sources that don't even exist today. And so we see this as it's a big risk, but it's also a huge opportunity that a lot of these new infrastructure can be put in a way that is less emissions intensive and can almost, as we like to say, leapfrog some of the developed economies which have locked into some of these old technologies. So a few key indicators from our sustainable development scenario, we see, like in our global picture for net zero, we see the clean electricity investment, the increase there is pretty huge, and there's a big investment need. And also that's something that we've highlighted in a broader report looking at the need for investment and the fact that the value of this investment done in India and other key emerging markets is a lot higher than the value of a lot of this investment in developed economies, and trying to make sure that we can encourage the global finance sector to direct that financing to where it can make the most impact, I think will be really critical. Like we see in the global picture again, we expect that EV sales in India will be increasing significantly out to 2040. we also see the role of energy efficiency being really critical and industrial energy efficiency increasing a lot. India's always been really impressive in terms of the work of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency and the PAT scheme, and expanding this efficiency to the industrial side will be really important. And then also going from a very low base at the moment, the increase in low carbon gases will be really critical. It's been great to watch the interest in India's national hydrogen mission and the increased focus there, as we think that can make hydrogen as well as biogases can make have a huge role in India's reduction in emissions. So that's all I've got in terms of the slides, but I'd be more than happy to discuss any of that further and take any questions if that would be helpful.
Thanks, Nicola. That was very interesting, good insight into what's going to be the direction in the future. Very interesting. I'm sure the participant must have liked it. Now we have some few questions. I'll pose it to you and let's get some more insight. Well, the first question is, in the journey towards 2050, what in your opinion could be the 3 major breakers to achieve net zero energy? 3 major obstacles, or whatever you may call it.
Okay, 3. I think one of the key ones is government policy. So one of the things that both our India outlook and looking at the different scenarios there, and even our broader net zero work, is the importance of government policy in terms of creating that enabling environment for this investment to happen, this innovation to happen. But then also, I guess, and secondly, this work can't be done by governments alone. So governments are the ones creating this framework, creating this environment in which the investment, in which the innovation can occur. But a lot of this is going to have to be driven by the private sector. So innovation companies, like traditional energy companies looking at their future role, they're going to be the ones playing a huge part of this. And there are some incredible opportunities out there for corporations in terms of what they can do. And I guess the third one, and probably something that I pointed to during the slides, is the need for international cooperation. Like, if all of the different countries working on this do everything, try and do it alone, it means it'll be so much less efficient. And I think encouraging countries to work together, so both governments and then the corporations underneath, to try and work and share knowledge, share best practice. Of course, different policies, different technologies will have to differ according to the circumstances locally, but ensuring we can share what we're doing, what's working, and make sure we can get that information sharing and knowledge sharing going, I think will be really critical. So if we don't have that international collaboration, I think that does put a lot of this net zero roadmap at risk. So yeah, I think those are the 3 sort of potential obstacles, but hopefully the ones that we can overcome if we all work together.
Thanks, very interesting. In fact, you answered part of the next question. The next question was, how do you look at the various European Unions, USA and Asian economies' approaches to this issue? And what are the cross-learning which can be imparted to achieve this net zero?
And I think that's a really tricky question. And that's something that I think it really depends on each specific technology and different policies. Like there's areas where you can dive into huge amounts of detail and find like specific policies that when we try and link up the different countries and share the experience of the countries that we work with others to try and get those policies shared across. And I'm trying to think of any specific examples, but I think, and one thing that we often highlight when we're speaking, particularly to Indian stakeholders, is that it goes both ways. You know, we're not just here at the IEA saying, oh, look, a lot of our member countries, here's the work that they're doing that you need to apply in India. But the scale and the scope of the challenges in India and the work that it's doing to roll out renewables, there's lessons in there for a lot of other countries that are hugely valuable in terms of how this can be done and how it can be done quickly and at scale. Like even India's experience in electrification is something that we're trying to look at and point, because I guess like but in reducing emissions, we don't want to, emissions are the problem, but not energy. You know, we want to have as much energy access as possible, and we're trying to share the experiences of India in terms of its huge electrification drive with a lot of the countries that we're working with, say in Africa and other emerging economies. So I think there's different examples that are always relevant for different economies, but it's definitely really valuable to have that engagement and work out where we can learn best from others.
Sure. Thanks. Next question. Do you see blue hydrogen taking over the traditional renewable energy like solar and wind in the next few years?
And I have to confess here, I'm not a hydrogen expert, but work closely with our colleagues across the IEA who are. And I think that it seems like hydrogen has sort of been a technology that comes in and out of favor. And there's every now and then there's a big wave of optimism about hydrogen. And then sometimes it can dissipate. But this is, I think this time has been, like the IEA, colleagues across the IEA, it's sort of this, it seems different this time. I think there's a real potential for it at the moment. I think, though you can't say at the expense of others, because I think one of the things that we found through the Net Zero report is that you need all technologies to be playing the role. So I think that it'll be a critical part of it, but other technologies will also continue to be very important.
Yeah, because I remember Prime Minister Modi talking about hydrogen a few days back, you know, that India is going to, the government is going to back it up. So let's see what happens. We don't know as we go along. But we hope that something good will come out of it for that.
Exactly.
That's With that, we'll end the session today. And it has been very interesting, very enlightening. And we hope that all of us combined together will make this world a better place to stay. You know, we'll not get those shocks, you know, the sea levels rising. You know, many countries are getting affected, worried whether the countries will survive or not survive, you know. And this is for all of us to play that important role and make sure that we make the earth a better place to live. So thanks once again, Nikhil, and it's very interesting listening to you. And wishing all the people who have listened to the presentation to contribute in their own small way to reduce the global warming as much as possible. Thanks once again to you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Mr. Singh, and thank you all. That's a great message. I think if we can all do our part, we'll definitely get there.
Thanks. Anything else?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Nikolai.
Close it now then?
Yeah, we can close it. Before we close, just an announcement.
Yeah.
So the next session will start at 2 o'clock. It's on the race toward net zero. So kindly use Hive platform of CII. So you can click on the green button to join. In case if you find the red button, which is showing as session not started, please refresh your browser. Thank you all.